everybody, Paul Abernathy here. Welcome to another episode of Master the NEC, the live show. Again, if you've never followed me before, this is a video podcast where we're talking all things electrical. And tonight we have a great discussion, and the phone lines will be open. So if you want to call in, if you have a story about it, something that you may have encountered that is similar to the topic. But tonight's episode is about when electrical inspectors go wild. Now, I will tell you a little story because, again, this is not a session tonight where I'm bashing electrical inspectors. I was one for years. I supervised them. I was a head of a jurisdiction when it came to the electrical division. So look, not a bash session when it comes to electrical inspectors, but we will talk about a little bit of what I've experienced through the years. And more recently, as most people know, I work for a large wire and cable manufacturer. So, it's a publicly traded company. It's large. They do have a lot of people involved. We're talking $3 billion, $4 billion company. And from time to time, I have to work and interact with electrical inspectors. And I also talk with a lot of electricians around the country who tell me various stories that they encounter. And so we're going to kind of talk a little bit about that tonight and basically kind of answer any questions you might have about electrical inspections. Again, by no means every jurisdiction is a little different. Some have their own requirements. Some have less requirements. So tonight we're going to look at the authority when it comes to electrical inspectors. We're going to look at their website. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. And I'm going to relate a little bit about inspections and how it goes in Texas, just because it might be relevant to where you are when it comes to electrical inspections, and give you some of my thoughts on it if you are an electrical inspector, that type of thing. So a little background about myself. Again, I was an electrical inspector with the city of Richmond, rapidly moved up to supervisor, then moved up to the engineer position, overseeing all of the inspections and plan review for the electrical and fire alarm years ago for the city of Richmond, Virginia. And then I left there after a couple years and went north to the city of Alexandria, Virginia, where I oversaw the inspection division there. And I had the chance to interact with a lot of electrical inspectors or people that were holding that position as well, and had to interact with them, interact with customers and whatnot. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the problems that you can encounter with electrical inspectors and how you should address that. And again, also to understand that they are not the end result, and anybody that fears retaliation really shouldn't, because if you can document that retaliation, then that's going to be a bigger problem for them. And nobody wants to lose their job, okay? So let's kind of go back a little bit as well. So one of the things that we worry about is each jurisdiction determines, for example, whether or not an electrical inspector is qualified. Electricians tell me all the time, how in the hell could somebody that doesn't have a background in electricity be doing my electrical inspection? And so the fact of the matter is they can, and they do, and they'll take separate courses. They'll get their ICC for residential or commercial or even plan review, and they may have never pulled one piece of cable. They may have never bored any holes in a dwelling, much less run any raceways or conduits or done any transfer switches or done anything like that. Yet we call on the inspectors to make sure that it meets the minimum safety standard of the National Electrical Code. So we kind of keeping all that in mind as we have this discussion. So let's talk a little bit about the prerequisites to be an electrical inspector, first and foremost. Again, knowing that every state's different, every jurisdiction's different, I'm only going to give you my experience. If you have any experience you want to share, please share it in the chat. Is many states, take Virginia, take Richmond. Now, Richmond had a situation where they would only hire, it was not written anywhere, but they would only hire as an electrical inspectors, they would only hire master electricians. But the problem with that is that they would only hire master electricians for electrical inspection positions. When you had plumbers and mechanical inspectors who were trying to make a little more money because they were pressured to make more money because they needed to be able to do more combinations when they're out there. They need to be able to do electrical, plumbing, mechanical, all in one trip, right? Then there was a lot more pressures put on the inspection division because now you've got electricians. If you're in Virginia, if we hired masters in city of Richmond, now you had plumbing inspectors and building inspectors and other inspectors who were not electricians, probably wouldn't know what a wire nut is, but yet they go sit for a test and now they have a certification to do electrical inspections. Of course, that rubs some of the electricians the wrong way, obviously. But this gave them, what they would do is they go get an ICC certification, take a test, and basically there's no prerequisite for that. You can go take the test and you get an ICC certification as a residential inspector or a commercial inspector or a plan reviewer. And now they can, and in the jurisdiction will send them out and let them do inspections. Okay. So that's one course that can take place. And that did happen where I was at in the city of Richmond. And again, it's you have to remember, though, that the supervisor has a lot of control of that and who they would let do what inspections. Okay. So in Richmond, I pretty much, when I was in control of it, I made sure that our electrical inspectors did electrical inspections. If you want to get certification in plumbing, mechanical, and whatever to make more money, because maybe they're giving you 5% of a bonus for every certification you get, that's fine. But from my perspective, I was very serious about making sure that when I had electrical inspections, that only my electrical inspectors did the electrical inspections. That's it, right? Now, so that's how we did it there. But again, they had that master license prerequisite to even get a job as an electrical inspector. Now, moved up northern to Northern Virginia, and this might resonate with where you're at, okay? So this might hit home with you. I went to Northern Virginia and oversaw the jurisdiction for the plumbing, mechanical, building, and electrical. And I did it with a gentleman. There was two of us monitoring it. I pretty much took the fire alarm and the electrical, and he pretty much took the building, mechanical, and the plumbing, because I wanted nothing to do with that. Although together we were overseeing the division, I didn't want anything to do with that. Fire alarm and electrical was fine for me. Now, when something happened and we needed to come together, we would just come together and make a decision. But anyway, we had lots of inspectors in the city of Alexandria that were doing inspections that they probably shouldn't have been doing. And we were pressured to do that. Once they got that certification, we would be pressured to actually send them out. And sorry about my dogs, folks. We would be pressured to send them out to do a inspection. And be honest with you, they might not have been qualified to do that inspection, but they were sent out to do it. And so I think around the country, this happens an awful lot, that a lot of inspectors are sent out to do inspections that they aren't necessarily qualified to do those inspections. They might have the piece of paper from ICC, they might have something like that, promisor, but they don't have the knowledge to be effective in that. Now, granted, most municipalities would do continuing education, so they're constantly trying to educate them. And then maybe they have a guy who has a lot of electrical experience on staff that works there. Maybe one of the electrical inspectors kind of oversees that type of thing. But again, every jurisdiction being a little different, there wasn't any prerequisite for that. Okay. So when it comes to an inspector in Gone Wild, all right, let me give you an example. We had one case where the inspector there was MC cable, and it was with 3-gauge conductors in it. And the inspector didn't see any markings on the conductors that are inside of the MC cable. Okay, fair enough. But the inspector kept pushing it. Now, the conductors aren't required to be marked on MC inside the cable. It's a misconception. Now, if they are marked, you could strip the armor off and use those conductors. But if they're not marked, then it's on the label of the reel, or the wooden reel, or the coils that has a little label. You're not required to actually mark inside on the conductors itself. If you do, then you can use them for an application. Now, in this case, it was AC cable, and it was 3-gauge, and it said clearly 3-3. That meant it was 3-gauge, 3 conductors in this AC cable. Okay, inspector wasn't happy with that. He wanted to know. He wasn't confident that that was 3-gauge. Even after the manufacturer gave him a product sheet saying it's 3-gauge, engineering department wouldn't accept the letter from the manufacturer saying that that product is using 3-gauge and it's exactly as it's been stated and used. The inspector still wasn't having any of it. And rumors are, and again, just rumors, that the inspector had some beef with them anyway, and he was just going to do anything he could to cause a problem on the job. Okay? Cannot deny that, cannot say that happened. All I'm saying is that's what was said. And the inspector continued to fail it because he says he can't tell what size conductors they are. Well, it doesn't take a brain surgeon to be able to go back and look at a label, or if the manufacturer tells you that's exactly what it is, then you accept that. This guy's having none of it. And it causes a slowdown in the project, almost to a standstill, almost to the point where it was going to force them to pull it out. And as an inspector, I can only inspect it. I can't expect it. So if the manufacturer supports it and says, this is what it is, this is what it's used for, it was obviously no NEC issue because there was no code reference ever given on any of it. It was just an inspector gone rogue who simply didn't like something and they just, wouldn't accept it. That's wrong. That is not how an inspector should be. Okay? The inspector should inspect something, and when evidence is brought to them, they accept it, and remember that they have no liability at that point because they accept it on what they believe to be true and what was supplied to them, and they're out of it. Okay? They don't have to make it a personal vendetta, that type of thing. That's one example of it. Other examples and that's one, and that's a still unresolved issue, I believe, currently, is another example. The other issue is back in the city of Richmond, they had one inspector who's no longer with the city who got in trouble because he was down on his luck, didn't needed the money, and he was pressuring contractors to pay him for inspection tickets, right? And that's a no-no, obviously. We, as an inspector, we couldn't take anything that would be constituted as a bribe. We couldn't take a gift card. You can't buy my lunch, nothing like that. If any of my inspectors did that, they'd have a problem. Okay? You want to have it appear that you are simply there to do your job. So that person obviously was terminated, and that was a problem there. Other cases we run into is where people call up and say, Paul, I have this inspector who, even though I've shown him the code, we've laid it out black and white, he still refuses to accept it. Now, this could come down to whether or not there's an issue in interpretation of the NEC. But electrical inspectors should not be so rigid and that they don't hear the argument that a contractor is making. If it is something that could go either way, then obviously they have to make the decision. I mean, they're the ones that are in authority. I get it. There's no question of that. But there have been many cases where some inspectors, not all inspectors, some inspectors will make people do things that they don't have to do just to make them jump through hoops. One of the best little inspectors I've ever met, and he's actually moved up pretty high in the ranks, and he is one of our CMECPs, is Greg Taylor, and he's in Tennessee. Top-notch electrical inspector. Okay. There is no doubt in my mind that he would not walk the line on any incident that he would encounter because he's that professional. But I also know that he's the kind of inspector that would listen to an argument before they made a snap decision. Okay. Now, when it comes to enforcement, let's talk about a little something. I'm going to show you something on the IAEI, if you've ever heard of it, International Association of Electrical Inspectors, who is basically where everybody goes if you want to be a part of an organization. Great organization. It really helps further the education for electrical inspectors because that's what we need. We need more education. Because again, a vast majority of electrical inspectors probably don't even have the slightest idea. Now, some do, but a vast majority probably don't even have the slightest idea how to run conduit, how to pull conductors, do anything. They pretty much know the book stuff. And that's okay because you're just observing stuff. You're not physically doing it. Okay. But the level of knowledge to do that has to be something that's validated through the jurisdiction. If a jurisdiction is sending an electrical inspector out there with subpar knowledge and there brings up all these possibilities of misfeasance, malfeasance, non-feasance, and all kinds of problems, right? Especially if somebody gets hurt and they missed it as an inspector. So don't think that they're totally immune from their role as the authority, okay? Now, typically electrical inspectors are not the AHJ. They're acting on behalf of or as a deputy to the AHJ, which could be the building official, the building commissioner, those type of things. That's typically what the electrical inspector does. So he's not necessarily the authority having jurisdiction, but he is the extension or the arm of the authority having jurisdiction, and he's been deputized, if you will, in order to write violations and issues, safety issues, and that's his role or her role, right? But you have to understand that every electrical inspector has somebody over their head. And there's somebody else that you can go to. I can tell you one incident where an electrical inspector would not accept an installation of MC cable unless they had anti-short bushings, to the point where we were talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of terminations over multiple floors that the inspector was going to make them. And this was the problem with this was it got all the way to the sheetrock stage when this inspector happened to bring something like this up. And now they were telling him, he was telling them, I'm gonna shut this place down. You're gonna have to rip out the sheetrock, and so I was contacted about that, and I told him, I said, anti-short bushings, is it smart to use them? If you want to use them, but you don't have to on MC. And that's what I told him. And I said, at this position, I think it's in your best interest to go over that inspector's head. And I don't care how high you go over, right? Go to the supervisor, go to the building official, okay? Go so far as going to the city manager or the mayor if you need to. If it's going to cost you a lot of money. Now, we do things all the time to just appease them and say, okay, Mr. Inspector, if that's what you want, I'll do it, okay? I cannot stand an electrical inspector, first of all. If you're an electrical inspector out there and you don't put code references on everything that you do when you turn somebody down, shame on you. You're not worth your salt to be an electrical inspector. If you can't put the code reference down, then you should be failing somebody. Now, the feedback to that is, well, I don't have the time. I've got so many inspections. Well, shame on that authority, because you need to get proficient in your profession as an electrical inspector, which is a profession today. Okay, and that if you're going to fail somebody and it's on you enough to know that that's a violation, that you look at it and you go, that's a violation, yet you don't write it down on an inspection ticket, shame on you. Whether you're required to in your state or not, shame on you. Because how is a person supposed to know what to fix if you don't give them a reference for something that they've done wrong? So most of the inspectors that I know, that I associate with, have enough pride to actually take an inspection ticket and actually put the violations on there so that the electrician knows exactly what to fix and what can. Now, when it comes to going over an inspector's head, Some of the things that I hear from people are retaliation. It's like wrestling with a pig in mud. After a while, you realize they like it. Things like that. You really need to get that out of your mentality. You're there to do a job. And if you're worried about him failing you on the next one over some frivolous shit, then that's when you need to be documenting it, writing it down, okay? Because it's costing you time, it's costing you money, and that electrical inspector needs to go. So how do you do that, okay? If it's just one incident, you're not going to get anybody to listen because the jurisdiction is going to support their inspector. But if there's a pattern of it, then that's going to go a long way. So documentation is going to be your strongest suit here. So if you're worried about an inspector retaliating because you go to a supervisor, then you know what? All I do is tell that electrical inspector, you're on notice. I'm going to be watching everything you do, right? And if he goes, well, I'll just keep failing you. And I'll go, you do that, because if you fail me on stuff that's not actually a violation, I'm going to go over your head, and I'm going to keep going over your head because I'm the consumer. I'm your customer, okay? That's what other times people forget. The electrical inspector forget, and I used to have to remind my inspectors all the time, when you're communicating with the electrician, with the customer, they're your customer. You treat them the same way you'd expect to be treated. Don't go to work with a chip on your shoulder. Don't go and try to take out your personal issues on somebody else. They're there to just get their job done. Now, if you're worried about retaliation and the inspector goes, yeah, I'm going to get you next time because you went over my head. Here's my advice to you. Learn the National Electrical Code. Why do you think I've been teaching it for 32 freaking years? Learn the code. Some of the shit that I see on Trade Hounds and Instagram and all these other social medias is an embarrassment to the electrical industry. Okay, I don't come back with that crap, Paul. You've never done this. I have done it. Go Google it. Okay, so I've been an electrical contractor. I have done all those things: troubleshooted, service work, CTs. I've done switchgear, all those type of things through my career. I just choose to teach now. I know those that can't teach. I hear that crap all the time. It's usually from the pinheads that hang over on that other message board system, right? Who will cry about that type of stuff because they want to pound their chest because they're a supertrician or something. Hey, look, the reality is this. If you're worried about retaliation, then maybe you're not up to par yet. Because if he's going to make or she's going to make up frivolous things and you're worried about that on your next inspection, then maybe you shouldn't be screwing up. And if they do call out things and they're wrong, then guess what? You go over their head. Okay, and I am going to make an offer right now. I don't usually do this. If you experience that with an inspector out there somewhere and you know you're in the rights and you're willing to go over their head, but you're afraid to pull that trigger, you tell you what, you give me a call. Okay, I'll tell y'all folks my number right now. Y'all know my number. It's on the website, 214-945-0653. Okay, you call me. I won't charge you a thing for consulting. I will listen to your case. I will listen to your situation, and I'll give you some advice. I've been doing that for many years. That's why I created paulabernathy.com. You can also go there and ask your question. I love my electrical inspectors. I love my electricians. But I cannot stand when somebody pressures somebody else. This is why I can't stand places like the YouTubes. And I know they're a necessary evil, but I can't, because for business and marketing, but I cannot stand anybody that tells me what you can and what you can't do, and within the confines of not breaking any laws or rules or whatnot. It's just your arbitrary what ifs. So when it comes to an electrical inspector, just do your inspection. Be an electrical inspector, not an expector. Okay? Don't assume what's going to happen down the road, because that's not your responsibility what happens down the road. Your responsibility is what here at this snapshot in time, you do the inspection. If you find code violations, the best way that you can support yourself, especially to your supervisor, if I'm going to go over your head, is to document your code violations. Write them down. Hard to refute that unless there's just a differing of opinion. And if that's the case, If it's a discussion of something that's an interpretation, then unfortunately the deck is stacked for the AHJ. Okay, it just is what it is. But there is many cases that I've gotten, just like with these anti-short bushings, that are not required, that the electrical inspector was literally going to stop the project, make them rip open the sheetrock so that they could remove, add these anti-short bushings when they weren't required. Okay? So they're required for AC cable. They're not required for MC cable. If you want to use them, that's great. I have convinced our manufacturer to stop sending them with the product, and others might follow because it sends a mixed message. It really does. It says that, oh, manufacturer expects you to use them. That's not in the listing, by the way. Okay. We're just providing them because we know that majority of the people out there, even the inspectors, really don't know the difference between AC and MC cable probably anyway. And one requires an anti-short bushing and the other doesn't. Okay. Why does MC not require it? Because of the way the fittings are listed. The way the fittings are listed to go with the MC cable and the way it keeps the conductors from touching the edge, it ends up being moot, and it's all part of the listing application. UL4, which is AC cable, come around a lot earlier than 1569 for MC cable. So UL4 for AC is really slow to change. MC is rapidly changed. We have new variations now. I have patents on 4 variations of it. So at the end of the day, don't make people do what they aren't required to do. Now, with that said, let's go on and look at the IAEI, because if you are, and again, I'm not a member of IAEI anymore, and don't ask me why, but the real reason was somebody that's no longer there anymore. So to be fair, I don't know the new administration. They may be great people. I'm just not involved. And a lot of the people that are involved have ties to certain organizations that I don't want to be any part of that. But as far as for electrical inspectors, not trying to get into the politics of IAEI, but if you're an electrical inspector and you want to just get knowledge, guys, the electrical inspectors out there, join the IAEI. There is the knowledge that they provide is amazing, and the resources they have is amazing. So step your game up. But again, before we look at the website, I want to tell all the inspectors out there, get the chip off your shoulder. Okay? You're working for a municipality, you're a public servant, and you're getting paid to do it, but you're getting paid to do a job, and that's to inspect, not expect. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay for the electrician to have to provide answers, but don't go to work with a chip on your shoulder, making them jump through hoops just because you're having a bad day. And electricians, don't be afraid to go over their head, okay? There will not be retaliation. And if there is retaliation, everybody's got a supervisor, okay? Everybody's got a supervisor. So always remember that. Now, let's go on and bring this up. So this is IAEI. This happens to be an old one here. This is from 2017. But I just wanted to show you, they have articles, their website, www.iaei.org, I guess what it is. I'm not 100% sure anymore what their website is. That's probably what it is. But just search for IAEI, and you'll see here. Now, this is an example of authority of the electrical inspector, right? So this is authority, okay? And one of the things that I took away from this article that was written by, let's see, who wrote this article, by the way, because it's a long one. Michael Weitzel, okay? He happens to be an electrical AHJ for Bechtel Inc., okay? It's a construction plant project guy, whatever. So he wrote this article, and it is quite interesting because it talks about, again, egos and what is their goal as the electrical inspector and all those type of things. So it's a very interesting read. But what I saw that was one of the key important parts is this right here. It says all authority has limits. Everyone answers to someone. In order to have authority, one must be under authority. If the person gets out from under authority, he will soon wind up with no authority and in trouble. Inspectors must follow the instructions of inspection supervisors and work with them and the customer towards the goal of electrical safety. It would be nice if inspections always fit neatly in a box, but often they do not. How does the inspector deal with situations when they do not? Existing installations can be an example of that. What do we do? How do you address those? Things like that. So for me, the importance is the inspector has to go in there with the concept of, I'm just here to do an inspection, and if I find something that's unsafe, I document it, and I give it to you. And you fix it, you call me, I'll come back out, and I'll inspect it. Pretty simple process. I have known quite a few electrical inspectors who take their job a little more seriously than they probably should from that aspect of it. Like they're the gatekeepers to the project. And they're not. Okay, they're just there to they're just there to do the inspection and get out. Go do another inspection. So again, don't be intimidated by them. But inspectors out there, get the chip off your shoulder. Okay, and just do your job. Now let's talk a little bit about qualifications. Okay, so I want to talk a little about what are the qualifications to be an electrical inspector. You might be surprised. Again, every jurisdiction is different. I told you what it was in Richmond. But let's go on real quick and see what it is for the jurisdiction here. So I just went on Indeed, okay? Just went on Indeed and is looking at job. And so here's one for electrical inspector in the city of Little Rock, Arkansas. Okay, 31,000 to 49,000. I literally don't know how people can live on that, but it is what it is. And I did once too, so I get it. Because they do work nonstop. It's not easy work being an electrical inspector. You're constantly on the go, okay? But let's look at the minimum qualifications here. So this one here says minimum qualifications says these knowledge, skill, and abilities are usually, although not always acquired through completion of high school or 2-year vocational technical training in the buildings or electrical trades, and 2 years of experience in the installation of electrical wiring system. Equivalent combinations of education and experience will be considered for a complete list of additional requirements. Okay, so most jurisdictions of what I have found is, and I have some folks in the room, James, again, thanks for joining me. I notice Lucio, am I saying that right? Thank you for joining me as well. See you in the chats. Let me know where you're at, where you're from. If you got any experience on inspections, let me know. So again, a lot of the times the boilerplate stuff that's put for inspections can be changed. In other words, I know of situations where electrical inspectors didn't know a thing about electrical, even though the job description said they had to have some history. They didn't. They got hired anyway, and they knew absolutely nothing about electrical. And then they ended up sending them to training, which was either put on by the state. In this case, the ones I'm talking about were put on by DPOR and the I can't remember the name of the organization in Virginia that does the training for the inspectors. It was the DHCD. I'm sorry. So we sent them to DHCD training. And they would take a class. Sometimes the instructors were good, sometimes not so good. And at the end of the day, once they get that training, so there's different types of training, right? So I'm just giving you my example. So in the city of Richmond, in order to do an electrical inspection, it didn't even matter that you got ICC certified as a residential inspector, right? It didn't matter. What you had to do is get that first. Then you could apply to the state, and then the state would issue you an inspector's license. Now, the state didn't care what experience you had to issue that. All they cared is you got that ICC certification. You don't have to have any prerequisites to get the ICC certification. You just go take a test, and provided you can pass the test, and we'll let you be an electrical inspector. Not the same everywhere, but that was what it was in Virginia. Now, let's see. We have a question. Juan asked a question. Let's see here, Juan, if I can get this on the screen here to see. It says, I've been told that in order to become an inspector, you must first have a journeyman or a journeyman wireman license. True or false? False. It all depends on the jurisdiction. Now, they might write in some requirements, and they might not. They might hire anybody. I gave an example in Virginia where the local jurisdiction wanted the masters only. But we had plumbers and mechanical guys in there who wanted to make extra money, get another 5%, had no experience at all, and all they would do is what? Pass a test, get 5% raise, and now they're an electrical inspector. Now, whether or not the supervisor gives them any work to go out and do is one thing. But I can tell you from my example, being at the city of Alexandria, Virginia, we had combination inspectors. And we had some inspectors that were doing inspections that were plumbing inspectors, right? And they were plumbers, and they were good plumbers, but they were not electricians. But they would send them out to do projects, and we couldn't tell them they can't because we were overruled, okay? And they said, look, they got that certification. As long as they got that certification, you send them out there. They didn't want us to get backed up with inspections. So you sent out a guy who had a certification, right, from ICC. And then once you get that, you send it to the state, and then you can do inspections. But were they really qualified to do inspections? Probably for electrical? Absolutely not. But you were forced to do that by the jurisdiction. It happens all over the country. So no. Now, there might be some states that require it. Some don't. Some might say a master's only. Some might say I need 2 years of experience in this. But there is no set rule. You could pretty much do whatever you want. It depends on what the jurisdiction they're hiring prerequisites are for, right? Because again, I know plenty of people that are doing electrical inspections that never had an electrician's license. And there's some that are really good inspectors. So I'm not knocking them. I'm just saying that it's not a prerequisite everywhere to have a license already, okay? So you have to also remember that, for example, let me give you a good example of that. Texas, okay? Texas. IAEI, which we'll argue is the authority on electrical inspectors for education and training and all that type of thing, is located right here in Texas. Richardson, Texas. Okay? You with me? Out in the county, Collin County, Hunt County, all these counties, Fannin County, all these counties out there, rogue. There's no inspections at all. Anybody can do anything they want. They get no electrical inspections at all. But this is the state that the Electrical Inspector Association resides in. But how come they never tried to lobby the state to require electrical licensing? They have a requirement for plumbers in the state, but they don't have anything for electrical. Why is that? I don't know. Now, talk about the different jurisdictions like Dallas and McKinney and Frisco and Plano. Their inspections are all governed by whatever guidelines are set up by that jurisdiction. They might put an ad out and say, we're only hiring journeyman electricians with 3 years experience or master electrician or whatnot. That is not set by the state. Now, I'm not saying there's no states out there that might have that, okay? I'm just telling you from my experience with that, okay? Let's see here. Juan says, nothing substitutes field experience as well as knowledge of the NEC. I feel that a good educational resource for anyone wanting to become inspector is the IAEI. Absolutely. I mean, IAEI is a wonderful resource. And look, if you're going to become an electrical inspector, y'all know me. I tell electricians who don't get their license and have been like apprentices for 10 years, I'm like, the hell are you doing? This is a profession. Nobody's going to just give you more money. You got to do something for yourself. Go get your license. Go get your masters. Go get your journeymans. Keep moving forward, right? But at the end of the day, that's the only way you're going to get forward. And with electrical inspectors, the only way that you're going to not have an issue with contractors, issue with your employer, issue with possible liability is to get better at your job, right? Just get better at your job. And what do you do to do that? A great example of that is IAEI. They do a lot of good training. We have a lot of inspectors that are in our courses, right? So they can learn the NEC better, right? You can't send an inspector out into the field and say, hey, I need you to get field knowledge all of a sudden. If they're already an inspector, this is not going to happen. But I have plenty of students that are in our program that maybe never got their hands dirty. They don't have the cuts to show for it, okay? I got the cuts to show for working in the field. Look, the end of the day, do I think all electrical inspectors have to have the field experience? No. Again, it's as long as they fall within their lane, and again, they become inspectors and not expectors, and as long as they really search for that education, right? Take the courses they need anytime there's an opportunity to learn. And definitely, what blaringly stands out to me, what creates what I call a subpar electrical inspector, is one that can't even cite code references on their inspection ticket, much less leave a ticket. Most states, you're required to leave a ticket. Now, interesting, in Virginia, the inspectors don't have to leave a code reference unless you ask for it. Well, that is the stupidest rule I've ever seen, or state thing, because you're basically failing somebody, and then you're not giving them an explanation of why you failed, right? And it's almost as bad as the inspector that'll fail somebody for improperly sized equipment grounding conductor, but instead of putting 250.122, they'll just put Article 250, just to give it a blanket statement. That says nothing more to me than you don't know what you're doing, than just citing broad, wide-ranging. You might as well just put violating the NEC and just walking away. It means to me that you don't know what you're doing, yet you're out there making decisions. Okay, so that takes me to a different topic. This is a topic that I know firsthand that came from an electrical inspector. Good little electrical inspector, you know, he was a guy who's been around a long time. He was a contractor for years. So I felt confident in his knowledge, okay? And he continued education. He took all the classes he could take. But one day I was having a conversation with him, and he made a comment. He said that I want it done my way, or they're not going to do it. And that was something that I could have gotten away with when I was a contractor. Inspector gigged me on it, and I said to him, I said, "So were you in violation?" He said it didn't matter. He wouldn't let me do it, and now that I'm an inspector, I'm not letting anybody else do it. I said, "Whoa, we need to talk." And I pulled him into my office, and I said, "You know, you really can't do that. I need you to." I remember having a conversation with an inspector, Jeff Harris, who's also a CMECP. He worked for me back at the city of Richmond. Wonderful guy, okay? Kind of mentored him. He took over my role for engineering when I left and went to Northern Virginia. He was in place to continue that. And I remember when we hired him. Now, there's a funny story. I don't know if it's funny, but we didn't hire him right away. We hired another guy. And y'all probably heard this story. And I took him out to show him how we do inspections here in the city. And if Jeff was on here, he'd tell you the story. I ran that guy all over town. I showed him how we had to do it. We had to keep up and do it and do it and do it. And he had trouble keeping up. And I said, "Are you okay? I mean, this is our expectation." He's like, I'm fine. Okay, well, I wasn't his direct supervisor. I was the supervisor over all of them, but I wanted to make sure that he was trained right, what the expectations were of the department. And then I would turn him over to another gentleman who would actually be his supervisor, and I supervised his supervisor. Anyway, I like to get my hands dirty. So I was out there showing them, this is how we expect it. This is what I want. This is how I interact with customers. And you need to be able to give them code references and do this type of stuff. And don't worry, we'll teach you that if you don't know all of them. I created little cheat sheets for them and all this stuff. I wanted to give the customer all of the information of why they failed. Okay, anyway, long story short, he went around with me all day. And I said, are you okay? He was a little out of breath, drinking a lot of water. And he went home that night. The next day, he never showed up for work. And, I didn't know what was going on. And I asked his supervisor, which is going to take over as his supervisor, I said, you need to find out what's going on. Well, he ended up calling his home, is like jumping on his wife before she could say anything. He's like, that's not how we work here. He's only been here one day, and now he's not showing up for work. And she informed him that he passed away last night. How do you think that reverberated around the office? For years, it's Paul killed the inspector, the new inspector. No, I just was out I did most of the running. He just was with me. But there was something wrong with his heart that they didn't know about. But at the end of the day, it was terrible. But Jeff was the hire to replace that guy. And Jeff was hired, and I took him under my wing and taught him everything that I could possibly teach him. And I had one conversation with Jeff as an inspector, and he's a contractor who's changing over now to inspector. That's a tough move sometimes for a contractor. I took Jeff and I said, Jeff, see this hat? This is your electrician's hat, right? I turned it around and I said, see this, Jeff? This is your inspector hat. You got to be willing to take off the electrician's hat and put on the inspector hat. And what that means is you can't fail somebody because you had been failed for something. Or you may have learned something wrong and now you learn the right way. You can't hold that against somebody else. You can't. And sometimes inspectors forget that. And they want to impose their will on somebody else for whatever reason. And again, I'm not saying every inspector's like that. I'm not berating everybody out there. If you're an inspector out there and you're offended, then maybe you have a reason to be offended. Maybe you need to look in the mirror. If you're an inspector out there who goes, yo, I get it. I know people like that. That is not how I do it. Kudos for you. But there are some inspectors that will get offended. And all I can say to them is you need to look in the mirror because there's a reason why you're being offended, because I don't think anything I'm saying is offensive. I've lived it. I've seen it. I've experienced it. I've been on the calls. I've had to deal with the intermediation between inspectors and contractors. And look, it happens. Some inspectors get a God complex and they will make it so difficult for a contractor. And it doesn't need to be that way. Now, if the contractor's literally doing something wrong, I get it. Nail them. But nail them professionally. Give them the code references to support why you're failing them. Things like that, okay? So, again, let's see here. Juan, let's see, what is the statement here? Paul, I feel guys like you, Ryan, Mike, and a few other elites, I don't know if I call myself elite, but I appreciate it, should make a united front in order to get inspections to be state mandated and required standards across the entire mainland. I'm nowhere near you guys in terms of pedigree. I tell people all the time, I'm just an electrician. I'm just a master electrician who, just like you, who dedicated yourself to the trade, and I love teaching other people. I like to tell people I am no Ryan and I am no Mike Holt. I'm just me, and I try to teach people. But at the end of the day, I don't know if that would work, and I'm going to tell you why. When I came from Virginia to Texas, with all of my history and background and everything, and serving on committees and all that stuff, I didn't have a Texas master's license. So, and I even helped them write the exams for the NEC for electricians here in Texas when this happened. And I served on the board, and I was like, all right, I feel like that's my responsibility to become a master in this state. I'm living in this state. I'm not going to do any electrical work anymore. But I feel like, I did my time. I put in my time. I grew my business. Y'all probably heard my story of my contracting business, me and my brother, and moving forward and owning my own contracting and how that grew and all that. I don't want to do that anymore. I'm done with that. Okay. I'll leave that to the Grundbergs of the world. I have no interest in that. Right. So at the end of the day, plus you wouldn't see my fat ass in a crawl space anymore now anyway. That would be just an ungodly sight. You don't want to see that because I don't need somebody to come oil me up and have to pull me out. I'm just saying. But at the end of the day, you have to remember that if you're going to be a contractor, you need to make sure that you do installations that are free from NEC violations, right? And that's an important thing. But back to my story. So I came to Texas and they said that you have to take the exam. I said, well, don't you have a reciprocity with Virginia? And they said, yeah, well, we're open to it, but Virginia won't talk to us. I called Virginia. I know certain people back in Virginia. You know what they said to me? They said, people in higher positions said, yeah, we have no problem. They just need to talk to us. You can't get the two to talk. So reciprocity requires the governor to sign mutual agreements that you'll accept the license and it has the same criteria of hours of training and everything. So they have to be equivalent in order to sign that mutual. Well, there was way more hours required in Virginia than it was Texas, so that wasn't the problem. Obviously, I had the hours, I had the time, the experience. That wasn't the problem. Yet they let me help write their exams. So what didn't connect here? And ultimately, it was the best decision either, is because I had to take the exam. And they wouldn't let me take the exam. I had to wait to take the exam. And obviously, I took the exam, and it was, needless to say, it was the easiest exam I ever took. Okay, because I kind of knew the questions, but not really. But anyway, so I got my master's in Texas. Okay, and I took the exam like everybody else. I ended up not wanting to fight this reciprocity thing. I was like, I'm not gonna be a contractor anyway, so screw it. I'll just take the damn thing. Plus, I want to know exactly the number of questions, how they did. I know we helped write thousands of questions. But I wanted to see how they were depicted on the Texas exam. And since it was a PSI based, I knew that's going to pretty much hold true for most of the country because they all use PSI. Now, the exam questions are written at the local level when they have their meetings. It's not something that PSI writes all these questions. It's done by volunteers at the local level, like I helped write them in Texas originally. Now, after that first time, then they realized that I helped people understand and pass electrical exams, even though I would never give the answers off of an electrical exam that I helped write. I have too many ethics for that. But nothing's wrong with teaching you the structure of an exam prep, and that's what I do. Well, they didn't like the fact that I teach people to understand the NEC in exams, so they denied me to be a volunteer. And that's okay, because you know what? I got other things to do. I did it of my own free will to help them to make sure that there wasn't stupid questions on exams. I can't stand a stupid question, right? Give the test taker enough information to be able to answer the question. That's all I ask, right? So anyway, this shows you that states don't talk. States don't communicate. And if in your own state where you have the IAEI, the authority for electrical inspectors, and you've still got counties that do no inspections, it's a wild, wild west still. And you know how I know this? Because y'all mostly know we were building a house out in the county. There was no inspections. I did the inspections and I nailed the contractor. You're going to fix this. Ultimately pulled out of the deal. But I gave them the third degree and they were like, we don't have inspections here in this county. I'm like, yeah, but I inspected it and I'm a third party inspector. I inspected it and you're either going to fix. They said, well, we're not going to fix them. I said, that's fine. I only have to make one call to TDLR. Why? Because the law is kind of weird in Texas. I don't know about your state. I'm just giving you my experience with electrical inspections. In Texas, even if the county doesn't have inspections, since the state adopts the NEC, if an electrician does work in the county, they're still supposed to govern themselves as basically this self-appointed AHJ, and all of their installations have to be compliant. They're still liable. So they kind of think they aren't, but they are. So if somebody got hurt, the state would step in, and the gentleman that worked for TDLR, Texas Department of License and Regulations, Jerry Daniels and them, they ain't gonna play. They ain't gonna play with you, okay? They'll come after you. So I'm like, do you want me to make a call, or do you want to fix these things? And they fixed them. I did a private inspection for another building that was being done here, and I'm talking about horrendous. I had a list of over 120 serious code violations, documented every one, okay? Basically the contractor told me, he said, well, I don't have to fix any of these. I said, yes, you do, because I'll be making one call and exposing you. And ultimately he fixed everything. But then after it was all done, he said to me, he says, that's okay. I'll just take these panels and all this other stuff that had knockouts missing. He says, I'll just use them in another county. They don't do inspections because you can't be everywhere. And I'm like, wow, what an attitude to have. You're willing to cut those if you're that kind of contractor, then you suck. I never want you to buy one of my courses ever. I don't want your money, okay? I don't want to teach you. If you're that kind of electrician that you're going to shuck your requirement, then I don't want nothing to do with you. If you're that low life, go somewhere else, okay? Get your training from somebody else. Most electricians that I deal with have a passion. They care about it. Yeah, we got to make a living, but they care about what they do, and they want to do it right. They just might not know that they're doing something wrong. Okay, you got to have a little bit of a moral compass, knowing that something's wrong, even if they're not going to see it, it's in the wall. You still got to have that moral compass and doing what's right. I couldn't sleep at night doing that. So, I have no sympathy for those type of people, and I don't think that's who I'm talking to out here. But when it comes to the inspectors, make sure that you cite your issues, okay? That's just a big thing for me, is to make sure that you're citing issues. Care. Juan says bureaucratic hurdles and derails all hurting the trade big time. We all suffering a huge skill gap. That is true. And the trade is crying out loud for new blood, but short-sighted bureaucrats are perpetrating a counterproductive status quo. I hate that. Absolutely. I could not agree with you more. And we know there's a trade shortage. We know we need skilled labor. There's a massive opportunity for you folks out there who want to grab it. You want to grab it, whether you're a guy that's just starting out and you're wanting to say, what can I do? I mean, think about this, folks. What can I do that doesn't require a college degree, right? That I could be my own boss. I could start small. I got a guy that called me the other day who wanted me to do training for his company. And I asked him, what do you do? He goes, we just do service work. That's it. I said, how many guys you got? I can't remember how many he said, but it was quite a few guys. He said, it's all we want. That's all we want. And he makes a killing. It doesn't take much for an electrician to get a truck, get a business license, and slap your name and start doing business for yourself. Whether you hit neighborhoods and start putting out door hangers or flyers or hitting your neighborhood, you can do it. But what else can you do? What other profession could you do that? I mean, I guess there's other ones out there you could, but man, electricians, you have such an opportunity. Don't screw it up doing shoddy crap. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, this wasn't about electricians. This is about inspectors. So I think y'all get the point. I'm glad y'all all could join me. That was just my thoughts on the electrical inspectors. I tell you guys, if you're going to be an electrical inspector, leave the ego at home. Do the inspection. Be humble, okay? Be humble. Do your inspection. Cite your code references. Be helpful where you can, because you are a public servant. You're working for a municipality, okay? Sometimes the contractor needs a little guidance too, okay? Now, that doesn't give them the right to disrespect you. That doesn't give them the right to do shoddy work and try to pass things on that shouldn't be done. Well, I think as an electrical inspector, you're going to get them. You're going to call them out. And that's going to speak for itself. Trust me. You don't have to add anything else to it. Just make sure that you cite your code references. If I could employ all electrical inspectors out there, and don't tell me you ain't got enough time, because then that's a problem too. That's a supervisor problem. You should have enough knowledge in your job that when you see something as a violation, how can you call it as a violation? It's kind of like on my exam prep, the Fast Tracks program. If any students out there know that when you answer a question but you don't give me a code reference, what do? I mark it wrong. Yeah, you might know that this is wrong, but do you know where you found it in the code? In our program, I want you to give me the answer. I want to know where you found it in the code book. Well, it's the same thing for an electrical inspector. If you're going to fail somebody, then you need to document why you failed them. Give them the code references so they can fix what's wrong, so they can fix the problem, okay? And inspector, you have every right to call out a violation. You don't have every right to impose your own will, okay? Your own wants, your own desires. It's not about you, okay? You're just there to do a job, okay? Trust me, they're the ones making the money for the project, okay? You're just there to make sure it's a minimum safety standard. Don't make people do things above the code. That's their choice. It's not your choice as an inspector. It's their choice to go above the code if they want to go above it. All you're there to do is to make sure they didn't go so far above it that they actually do a 180 and screw it up. That's your only job. Continue your education, okay? Constantly continue your education as an electrical inspector. Don't get complacent. Don't let your own personal wants get in the way of what your job is. Document everything when it comes to inspection, code references, and you're not going to have any problem with people, okay? You're not at all. Juan says, I'm 62, never had a license, yet I worked in some very complex projects in New York City, as well as serving some young ones as a mentor. That's awesome, Juan. I can only tell you that from my perspective, and hopefully it doesn't offend you, but I am all about licensure. I am all about pushing people to get licensed and continue in that process. And it's not about selling courses. Obviously, I don't advertise. I'm not all over the search engines. I'm not paying to be in books and magazines. People come to my training organically. They just find me. And we help them be successful. But I'm also very blunt. I don't cut any corners. Okay, ask anybody. Ask Ross, who's in our Fast Track program. I say it as it is. Okay, I don't cut any corners because it wouldn't do you any justice. You need to hear the truth, the facts. That's what I do. So sometimes I rub people the wrong way. But again, I was not here to do anything but to pass on this education, and that's what I do. In your case, again, you found success without a license, but I would always mentor people, get that license, step up, put that piece of paper in people's face. It does mean something that those that have it keep moving forward. But I understand sometimes people work for companies where it just doesn't behoove them to get that license. It's not going to benefit them. I have to get the license because it benefits me inside. That's my only reason why that I say do licensing, that type of thing. Okay. All right. Well, folks, you heard me rant. Hopefully you got something out of it. If you're an inspector out there and it's changed even one of you to now require inspections, to have all of the code reference when you fail somebody, and I feel like my job has succeeded, you're a professional. And here's the other last thing I'll leave you with. One person told me one time, they said, I'm an inspector, I'm not an educator. Okay, so when an inspector says, I'm not here to teach somebody the code, I disagree. Strongly disagree. If you're an electrical inspector, you are an authority figure. If you're going to call something out, Juan, you just go to my website. All the contact information is on my website, fasttracksystem.com. We have a contact us page. Everything's on there. So when I tell you, like, you know, at the end of the day, I don't even know where my train of thought was on it, but I kind of got off track of what I was talking about. Juan, you kind of threw me with that one. So if you need to reach out to me or whatnot, always can reach me on my website. But at the end of the day, electrical inspectors, just remember, it's a profession. You're an educator. That's where I was at. You're an educator. you like it or not, when you fail somebody, you're required, in my mind, as an inspector, to educate them why they got it wrong. And if you have some extra knowledge and you don't share it, and provided it's accurate knowledge, by the way, it's got to be accurate knowledge. If you don't provide that knowledge, then you're not doing your trade a service, because that's what your job is out there, to inspect it and impart knowledge if you have it, not to make things up, right? Not to impose things on people because it was imposed on you, not to go there with a chip on your shoulder and cause problems for somebody that's just out there trying to make a living. But if somebody is doing some shady crap, then you catch them and you nail them. Just make sure you cover your butt with code references. That way there can't be any argument on it. That's how you protect yourself. And that's what I used to tell all my inspectors. I expect you, don't come to me. If I get an inspection ticket and contractor calls me and I look at it and they call me the supervisor and say, this guy failed me, but he didn't give me a reason, you're going to be in my office, because I put a mandate out. I said every inspection will have a reason for rejection, and you're going to document it. I've given you the books. I got the guides for you. I gave you the cheat sheets. We give you laptops with the code references in it. We gave you code books. Okay, you've got your phone with stuff on it. There is absolutely no, we send you to training. I used to train twice a week in-house. So there is no excuse. Give the poor electrician his code reference and then move on to your next job. Okay? All right. All right, folks. Thanks you all for joining me. Hope you got something out of tonight's episode. We will have another Master the NEC show coming up shortly. And it will be another one on another article within the National Electrical Code. I'm not exactly sure which one yet. And also the 2023 edition of the Fast Tracks is coming out in probably the next 2 or 3 weeks. And so a lot of our education will be geared towards the 2023. Revamping everything, all of our derating, demystified, everything. But we're also going to put references in there for the 2020 as well. So don't feel like you're going to be abandoned when we do the 2023. We are going to also include references for the 2020 and everything. So get excited if you're into code. If you're not, and you say, I don't care about you, Paul, that's fine. You won't hurt my feelings at all. Trust me. But if you're here to learn, I'm here to teach you. Thanks for following, folks. Till next time, stay safe. God bless.